Hey folks, this is JR with DIY Prepper. Welcome to the channel. Seems like every time that you go to the grocery store, at least something that you need to buy is more expensive than it was during your last trip. Eggs are the most obvious example of that, but there are others. Inflation has been a big problem for the past few years, and it's probably not going to slow down, at least in the near future. Then another issue we could face with our food supply is shortages. Since our world is so interconnected, numerous things could prevent food from reaching our tables. Things like conflicts in different parts of the world, bad weather during growing seasons, and labor shortages can all have a big impact on whether food can be shipped to where we live or even grown in the first place. And even though these are very real threats, there are several things that we can do to help insulate ourselves from them. First, we can stockpile food while it's still available. Canned goods and dry staples are go-to options for many folks since they have long shelf lives, and frozen foods can be a decent option under the right circumstances. You can store meat, fruits, and other items in that way, but if you do that, be sure you have a way to keep your freezer running during a power outage. But even though it is important to stockpile as much food as you can, relying totally on stored food isn't ideal. You could eventually run out of food if a situation lasts long enough, and sometimes it's just nice to have something that hasn't been stuffed in a can or a Mylar bag for months or years. Aside from being good for morale, fresh foods also have higher amounts of nutrients, and growing a garden is the most accessible way for most people to have a long-term supply of fresh food. Now, when most people think of gardening, they picture a big honkin' row garden. They either think of a huge farm that takes up dozens of acres, or like a big backyard just filled with plants. And if you're someone that can do those sorts of things, then that's great. You could grow a ton of food, but you don't have to live on a homestead to have a decent garden. Even a 10 by 20 foot space in a small backyard can work well for raised garden beds. But really, you don't even need that. There are ways that anyone can grow their own fresh produce, and that's what we're going to talk about today. If you don't have enough space for a row garden, or you're like me and want to expand what you're able to grow beyond your raised beds, then container gardening is a viable option. It's doable for almost anyone, including apartment dwellers. If you have a porch that gets sunlight, you should be able to grow at least something. Then container gardening also has some other benefits as well. Growing plants in containers can help you experiment with the best places to establish a larger garden later on, and you can also use containers to grow plants that aren't as well suited for your area. For example, where I live in eastern Texas, it gets a little too cold in the winter to support certain tropical plants. By using dwarf varieties of things like bananas and oranges, people who live in areas similar to mine can keep those plants outside for most of the year and then just bring them inside when temperatures drop below a certain level. And being the beginning of March, this is a very good time to get started with a home garden. The weather's starting to get a little warmer in a lot of places, and stores are getting the supplies that you'll need to do it. For my containers, I prefer to use food-grade 5-gallon buckets. They're cheap. I can get them under for like $4 each at local farm and ranch stores, and they also have plenty of space for plants to grow a healthy root system. To use them, drill some holes in the bottom for drainage, add some rocks or mulch to the bottom, and then add your soil. You should be able to get around like 3 or 4 years out of your buckets before the sun starts to break them down. Grow bags are another good option, but they don't hold up well against squirrels and other pets. I mentioned that in last week's video, how this little fat monster of a squirrel systematically chewed up every single one of my grow bags. I'd like to fry him up and see how he likes being eaten, but I'll move on. You can also get larger plastic buckets, and those work well for growing things like potatoes. Having more space in the container will give them more room to grow, resulting in larger potatoes, which is a good thing. But certain plants are more well suited for growing in containers than others are. In my experience, plants that produce smaller fruit work a lot better. For example, I've had better results from my cherry tomatoes grown in containers than I have like my larger beefsteak tomatoes. Then most hot peppers will do well in containers as well. I've been able to grow jalapenos, serranos, and even more exotic varieties like Carolina Reapers and Trinidad Scorpions without any trouble. Banana peppers also do well, but I have had trouble growing large full-size bell peppers. I was able to grow some minis, but I prefer the flavor like the full-size ones a lot more. Root vegetables like beets, radishes, and carrots can do well in containers as well. Then an arrow garden's another good way to garden if you don't have a lot of space. They're basically self-contained hydroponic systems that provide water, light, and nutrients to your plants. They're very easy to use, but they do require electricity. So if you plan on using one during a disaster, be sure you have a reliable power source. I have the Harvest, which is one of their smaller models and more well suited for growing small things like herbs and leafy greens, but you can get larger ones that can grow full-size vegetable plants. I also have the seed starting kit for mine, which allows me to start up to 23 plants at one time. I like it since it doesn't require a whole lot of attention after you set it up. All you have to do is add more water or fertilizer every so often, and it also does a really good job helping seeds to sprout. After they've grown a little bit, I transfer the plants to small plastic or peat pots until they're ready to be planted outside. One important thing to note, though, about peat pots is that you have to tear the bottom out of them before you put them into the ground. I didn't really know that during my first year using them, and my plants really struggled. The roots never got past the peat pot, so I had some nice green bushes, but not a whole lot of fruit. But starting seeds indoors in my air garden lets me get my garden going a little earlier than just planting the seeds directly into the ground. It lets me take advantage of higher yields during the very first part of summer before it gets super hot, because after that temperature increase happens, productivity on a lot of plants starts to go downhill. Another good way to grow at least some food if you don't have enough room for a full garden is seed sprouting. Sprouts have a ton of nutritional value and they're considered superfoods. They're rich in vitamins, minerals, fiber, and antioxidants, which can help things like heart and digestive health. And that makes them beneficial even if you have like a large full-size garden behind your house. You can grow them on a windowsill, so anyone can grow them, and they're not going to be affected by outside conditions like drought. So if your main garden doesn't perform as well, at least you could have some sprouts. Then if you can't grow a larger garden, sprouts can help your body get additional nutrients that it's not getting from any food that you stored ahead of time. Alfalfa sprouts are very popular along with chickpea, kale, and sunflower. Now when it comes to gardening, there are some things you need to know regardless of the method that you're using. First, you need to know how your location will determine the types of plants that you can grow. Each plant will grow best in certain climates and it'll do very poorly in others. Many tropical plants won't survive a frost, and then other plants won't do well in hotter areas. And the best way to determine if a plant will do well where you live is to take a look at the USDA Plant Hardiness Zone map. You can even enter your zip code to determine the hardiness zone for your exact location. You can then compare that with the plants that you'd like to grow to determine if they would be a good fit. Then aside from hardiness zones, there are some other things that you should know about your plants as well. Some plants, like tomatoes and peppers, do best with full sun. Others, like kale and carrots, do well with a little bit of shade. You could either make plots or raised beds in different locations of your yard to accommodate those needs, or just place them in containers in the areas where they grow best. Also, some plants are going to need more water than others. Cucumbers and peppers will need quite a bit, while eggplants and okra are a little more forgiving. But where things are planted will also have an effect on how much water they'll need. Plants in containers are going to need more water since containers will dry out faster than moisture in the ground will. On the other hand, if your soil has a lot of clay, you probably won't have to water as much since clay does a very good job of absorbing and holding on to moisture. Then the type of soil that you have is important in other ways as well. Some plants, like tomatoes, raspberries, and potatoes, do better in slightly more acidic soil, while others, like beets, kale, and garlic, prefer more alkaline soil. You can determine the pH of your soil by using a kit or using simple items like distilled water, white vinegar, and baking soda. My recommendation, though, is to just order some test strips online. They don't cost a whole lot of money, and they'll tell you the exact pH of your soil, rather than the DIY methods that just tell you if your soil is more acidic or alkaline. If you're able to plant in the ground, you may also want to consider companion planting. This will help you grow more or better tasting fruit and also limit damage caused by pets. Planting tomatoes or peppers near basil is an example of this. Then, having an understanding of companion planting can also help you avoid potential issues. For example, growing cabbage or broccoli too close can actually stunt the growth of your tomatoes or peppers. Then planting flowers like marigolds and lavender can help attract pollinating insects such as bees to your garden, which can help you have a bigger harvest. When it comes to supplies and equipment, good seeds are the foundation of a successful garden, especially if you want it to be sustainable year after year. Heirloom varieties will grow true to type, meaning that the plant that grows from a seed will be very similar to its parent plant. This allows you to harvest seeds from what you grow this year and use them to plant next year's garden. Seeds from hybrid plants, which is mostly what you'll find at stores, will probably have traits more similar to one parent plant than another, and plants that grow from them may or may not produce fruit. Then fertilizer is also really important. That can include commercial options, manure, and fish emulsion. If you have animals, then you probably already have a good supply of manure at your disposal, but it should be composted before you use it on your plants. Chicken poop, for example, can burn plants because it has high concentrations of nitrogen in the form of ammonia. Composting that will help bring those levels down to more suitable levels. But even if you don't have animals, composting is still a good option. You can use scraps of fruit and vegetables, eggshells, and other food items, along with paper products, leaves, and grass clippings. Just be sure to avoid anything that's been chemically contaminated because you don't want that in your soil. Then different kinds of shovels, rakes, and other gardening tools are also essential, along with a good garden hose. When selecting hoses, get those that are from good brands like Flexzilla, since they'll last longer and also be less likely to kink, and get one that's a little longer than what you think you'll need. A lot of the time when you go to water your plants, it's not going to be a straight path. You may have to go around plants or other obstacles, and having a longer hose will just give you more flexibility in those situations. Then hose rails are useful since they'll keep your hose untangled and ready to use, and a good sprayer will help you fill up containers or water plants. Watering cans are good to have as well, especially when your plants are a little smaller since you'll have more control over how much water you're giving them. Sometimes water from a hose and sprayer can be a little bit too much for smaller seedlings and may knock them over. Sprinklers can save you a whole lot of work. Just make sure that they're set up properly. You don't want one group of plants getting totally waterlogged, while another group of plants hardly gets any water at all. Utility carts and wheelbarrows are also useful, especially if you're having to move heavy things like soil or transport container plants inside for the winter. I usually prefer utility carts since they hold everything flat, but if you get a wheelbarrow, get one with two wheels at the front instead of just one. They are a little more expensive, but they're also a lot more stable and less likely to get stuck and cause you to get pole vaulted over the top of it, which that's never fun. If you're starting your plants inside, you'll also need some grow lights. I use mine for after I transfer my seedlings from the AeroGarden to individual pots. I'll usually keep them in those for a few weeks so that they can get used to living in soil without being further shocked by living outside all at the same time. Larger trays like this one are also good to have since they'll hold several smaller plants and will protect tables and other surfaces from any water that leaks out from the bottom of your pots. Now, if you're interested in using your garden in a long-term survival situation, then be sure to check out this video over what you need to survive the first month after a collapse, or if you're a new prepper and are wondering what you should buy first, then take a look at this video that covers the top 15 most important survival items. Thank y'all for stopping by. Y'all have a good one.